"You've earned your rest, Dad," he said, as he slid the nursing home brochure next to my birthday cake. But then I saw it, a bank officer's business card stapled inside. My own son had already started the transfer to seize my store. Worse, he'd told our family I was senile, and they believed him. Even Sister Margaret at church said I was different lately. I wasn't losing my mind, I was being erased. But I didn't flip the cake. I handed him something else instead. The deed, the trust, the proof, the part my wife and I had hidden for decades. He tried to bury me in brochures. He didn't know I still held the land, and I'm giving him 6 weeks to find out how badly he underestimated me. My name is Walter Carver, and I'm 75 years old. Every morning I unlock the hardware store I built from nothing, just as I have for 52 years. My late wife Sarah's laughter used to fill these aisles, making even the sawdust dance in the morning light when that brass bell above the door chimed. Our son Darren visits monthly now, speaking in consultant phrases about succession planning and asset optimization that make my shoulders tense. What he doesn't know is that Sarah and I prepared for everything. The witnessed signatures and dated documents rest secure in my office drawer, which closes with a satisfying click each night. But let me start from the beginning. I'd spent the afternoon getting everything just right for my birthday dinner. You know how it is, wanting to keep traditions alive even when the table feels emptier. I smoothed out Sarah's best tablecloth, the one with the embroidered edges she'd proudly brought back from that craft fair in Milwaukee back in '82. The silver candlesticks caught the early evening light, throwing warm shadows across the framed photos on the wall. Sarah's chair sat empty, like it had for 3 years now, but I'd dusted it special anyway. The chocolate cake, store-bought, since Sarah wasn't here to bake, sat in the center, its 75 candles waiting to be lit. Funny how something as simple as birthday candles can make your throat tight when you're lighting them alone. Remember those days when your kids were small, and birthdays meant crayon cards and sticky kisses? Times change, I suppose. At exactly 6, the doorbell rang. Darren stood there in one of those shirts that cost more than I used to make in a week, all creased perfection and corporate polish. His smile was just as crisp, the kind they teach in management seminars, I'd bet. "Happy birthday, Dad," he said, stepping in with that efficiency that always made me feel like I was being assessed rather than visited. He carried a leather portfolio under his arm, the kind meant for important documents rather than birthday cards. We did the usual dance, him commenting on how well I kept the house, me offering him Sarah's special occasion glasses for the wine. But something felt off, like when you hear the store's bell ring but look up to find nobody there. As I started cutting the cake, Darren cleared his throat and pulled something from that portfolio. It was a glossy brochure, all sunshine, and smiling seniors with Sunset Pines Nursing Facility written in soothing blue letters across the top. He placed it right next to my cake plate, as casual as passing the salt. "I've got something special for you this year," he said, that corporate smile never wavering. "You've earned your rest, Dad. Sunset Pines is the premier assisted living facility in 3 counties. My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. The chocolate frosting suddenly smelled too sweet, mixing with the sharp ink smell from that brochure. My stomach clenched like I'd swallowed a bolt without threading it first. "Why tonight?" I managed to ask, though my mouth had gone dry as sawdust. "The timing's perfect," Darren said, leaning forward like he was closing a sale. "For everyone involved. You get round-the-clock care, social activities, no more worrying about maintaining the house or the store." "The store?" cut in, my voice sharper than I meant it to be. "Well, naturally, we'd need to arrange a transfer of ownership," he said smoothly. "Can't have you trying to manage business decisions from a retirement facility, right?" I flipped through that brochure, past photos of seniors playing bingo and watercolor classes, until something caught my eye on the back page. There, stapled neat as you please, was a business card from First National Bank. Marcus, Wheeler Commercial Loans Officer. The room seemed to tilt slightly. I recognized that name. He'd been sniffing around the store's books last quarter, asking questions about succession planning that I'd brushed off. "When exactly?" I asked, keeping my voice as level as a spirit gauge. "Did you start talking to the bank about my store?" Those candles were still flickering on the cake between us, casting strange shadows across Darren's face as he started his reply. How had we gone from birthday wishes to this? Right then, those 75 little flames felt less like a celebration and more like a countdown to something I wasn't sure I was ready to face. Darren's smile never slipped as he laid out my future like he was presenting a quarterly report. The store's becoming a legacy risk, Dad. We need to think about sustainable transitions. He pulled out a folder thick with charts and spreadsheets. Ever notice how people try to bury bad news under fancy words and colored graphs? Your daily routines are showing clear decline indicators, he continued, pointing at a red line that swooped downward. Missing vendor calls, irregular hours, inventory miscounts. Hold it right there. I straightened in my chair, the birthday cake forgotten between us. I haven't missed a single vendor call this quarter. Check with Tommy at Midwest. Supply, we've done business for 30 years. Our inventory turns are steady at 4.2, same as always. And unlike half the stores downtown, we don't owe the bank a dime. Darren's expression shifted to something worse than anger. Pity. Dad, you're remembering things the way you want to. Last month alone, 3 suppliers called me because they couldn't reach you. Called you? Why would they? Because they're concerned. He reached across the table like he was comforting a confused child. We all are. This isn't just about the store, it's about your safety. The word hit me like a hammer to the thumb. Safety? I've run that store since before you could walk. Who's been feeding you these lies? They're observations, Dad, from people who care about you. He glanced toward the living room, where photos of extended family lined the walls. I've discussed this with Uncle Pete and Cousin Mary. They agree it's time for a change. My chest tightened as pieces clicked into place. All those Sunday dinners where relatives watched me cut the roast, their whispered conversations that stopped when I entered the room. They weren't concerned, they were waiting, probably already planning the handover party, picking out new paint colors for the storefront. No, I set my fork down with a clink that cut through Darren's rehearsed speech. He actually chuckled. Dad, this isn't really a yes or no situation. The community expects leadership changes at some point. We're just being proactive. The community? I could feel my hand starting to shake, knuckles going white around the cake knife I was still holding. You mean the customers who've trusted me for 50 years? The ones who come in because they know I'll give them straight answers, not corporate doublespeak. Times change, Darren said smoothly, but his phone buzzed before he could continue. He glanced at it, trying to angle the screen away, but I caught the notification. Bank. Monday. What's happening Monday? I asked, though my gut already knew. Just a preliminary meeting, he said too quickly. Standard procedure for these transitions. The candles were burning lower now, wax dripping onto Sarah's favorite tablecloth. 75 little flames, 1 for each. Year I'd built something real, something honest. And here sat my son, treating those years like items on a clearance shelf. You've got it all planned out, don't you? My voice came out quiet, but it carried the weight of every nail I'd ever driven home. The bank, the nursing home, the store, all wrapped up neat as a hardware display. It's for the best, Darren insisted, his corporate mask finally showing cracks of irritation. Everyone agrees. Even Sister Margaret at church mentioned you seemed different lately. The betrayal stung worse than any workplace injury I'd ever had. Sister Margaret had been Sarah's closest friend. How long had Darren been poisoning the well, turning my community against me? Different. I set the knife down before temptation got the better of me. Let me tell you what's different. My son, who used to stack washers by size in the back room, now sits here, plotting to pack me away like obsolete inventory. You know what keeps a man awake at night? Not the usual things. Not the creaky joints or the memories that come calling in the dark. No. What kept me up that birthday night was pure, cold purpose. Ever had one of those moments when you know you're right, but you need the proof to show it? I spent hours at my old roll-top desk, the one Sarah had rescued from a yard sale back in '82. The lamp threw warm circles on stacks of papers as I pulled out everything that spelled out 50 years of solid business sense. My fingers knew just where to find each document. They were organized Sarah's way, which meant you could find anything blindfolded. The deed to the store lay first in line, its corners crisp despite the decades. Next came vendor contracts. Tommy from Midwest Supply had just renewed for another 5 years, his signature still fresh on the dotted line. Tax returns marched across the desktop in neat columns, showing steady profits that would make any accountant smile. I even dug out the inventory logs, tracking every nail and bolt we'd sold since January. "Numbers don't lie," Sarah used to say when we'd do the books together. The memory of her voice steadied my hands as I arranged everything in a leather portfolio, her Christmas gift to me the year before she passed. By sunrise, I'd rehearsed my talk with Mike Peterson, our accountant of 30 years, until I could recite profit margins in my sleep. Mike knew our business inside and out. He'd see through Darren's smokescreen quick enough. I arrived at Mike's office before his secretary had finished her first coffee. The waiting room smelled of leather chairs and lemon polish, just like always, but something felt different. Maybe the way she wouldn't quite meet my eyes when she announced me. Mike's office was all mahogany and morning light when I spread out my evidence on his desk. The ledgers opened to clean margins and clear numbers, black ink telling our success story in plain arithmetic. "Look here," I said, tapping the latest quarterly report. "Inventory turns steady, accounts receivable under 30 days, cash flow positive every month since 75. Does this look like a business that needs transition?" Mike leaned back, his reading glasses catching the sun. I'd seen that same careful expression when he'd handled Sarah's estate. "Walter," he said, "numbers are only part of the picture." My coffee went cold in my hands. "What other part matters, Mike? We've worked together 3 decades. You know how I run things." He shuffled some papers, not mine, but ones already on his desk. Darren's shared some concerns. "There are incapacity indicators we can't ignore." That word again. Incapacity. Based on what? Late deposits? Missed meetings? The incident with the Johnson invoice? One misplaced invoice in 50 years. The leather arms of my chair creaked under my grip. "It's a pattern, Walter." His voice went soft like he was explaining something to a child. "For everyone's stability, a managed transition makes sense. Darren has a solid plan. Darren has a plan to throw me in a home and take what I built." The words came out sharp enough to cut. Mike spread his hands. "Nobody's taking anything. This is about protecting the business. And you." I stood up, my knees steady despite the floor seeming to tilt beneath them. One by one, I slid my papers back into Sarah's portfolio, each movement measured and precise. My smile felt like chalk as I thanked him for his time. In the parking lot, I called the bank. Martha, who'd handled our accounts since her first teller job, answered on the second ring. "I need to move some funds," I said, trying to keep my voice level. The pause stretched too long. "I'm sorry, Mr. Carver. Your accounts are partially restricted pending guardianship review. I can't authorize any transfers without my son's approval." The words tasted like copper. "I really am sorry," she whispered. I held the receiver long after she hung up, listening to the soft hiss of defeat rising like steam from sun-baked concrete. The morning crowd rushed past on the sidewalk, but all I could hear was that empty line tone, singing the same note as betrayal. Back on Main Street, the morning sun felt too bright, like it was spotlighting every shaky step. I caught Mrs. Henderson watching from her flower shop, her head tilted just so, the way folks look at stray cats they're worried might be sick. When she saw me notice, she ducked behind her roses faster than a rabbit in hunting season. You know that feeling when a room goes quiet the moment you walk in? Main Street had turned into one long version of that. Even Dave at the coffee shop, who'd usually chat my ear off about his grandson's baseball games, just slid my usual across the counter with a careful smile. "Taking it easy these days?" he asked, like he was testing ice on a winter pond. "Business as usual," I said. But the words felt hollow as an empty paint can. The whispers followed me down the sidewalk. Slowing down floated past like falling leaves. Getting on in years drifted through shop doors. Each step felt heavier than the last, my shadow stretching long and thin in the morning light. Inside the store, the fluorescent lights hummed their same old song, but everything else felt off-kilter. My hands trembled as I tried to price the new socket sets, the label gun clicking like a time bomb with each squeeze. 3 times I had to peel off crooked stickers and start again. Sarah would have steadied my wrist, the way she did that time I was fighting the flu, but insisted on finishing inventory. The register drawer stuck when I pulled it open, and the sight of those neat cash stacks hit me like a punch to the gut. Payroll was due Friday. 4 employees counting on checks I couldn't write, thanks to those partially restricted accounts. Tommy's supply order needed settling too, and the quarterly tax payment. I slumped onto the stool behind the counter, the same one Sarah used to perch on while working crosswords between customers. The Sunset Pines brochure was still in my jacket pocket, crackling like autumn leaves when I pulled it out. The photos showed tidy rooms with big windows, smiling nurses bringing medication right on schedule. No bills to juggle, no whispers to dodge, no shame in surrendering to the quiet. My fingers traced the glossy pages, following paths between flower gardens where residents played checkers in eternal sunshine. Maybe Darren was right. Maybe it was time to... The thought stuck in my throat like a fishbone. Closing time came slow as molasses in January. I flipped the sign to closed and stood in the doorway, one hand on the frame where Sarah used to lean, waving goodbye to regulars as they headed home with paint cans and pipe wrenches. The brass bell above the door hadn't changed its tune in 50 years, but tonight its ring sounded more like a funeral toll than its usual cheerful ding. My keys rattled in the lock, a lonely sound that echoed off empty sidewalks. Streetlights were just flickering on, casting long shadows that seemed to reach for me with grasping fingers. Then came the knock, 3 sharp raps, military precise. I knew that rhythm before I even turned around. Hank Moore stood there, straight-backed as ever despite pushing 80, his Marine Corps cap set at the same angle he'd worn it in Da Nang. A battered thermos dangled from one hand, steam curling from its open top with the unmistakable smell of coffee, strong enough to wake the dead. His weathered face cracked into the same grin I'd seen in 100 foxholes. "Heard you could use some reinforcements, Walt." The lump in my throat grew 3 sizes. "They say I'm finished, Hank." My voice cracked like old paint. "Maybe they're right." His grin never wavered. "That what you told the NVA when they had us pinned down at Quezon?" "Come on back," I said, flicking on the office lights. "Coffee's not as good as Sarah's, but it'll do." The back counter was our sanctuary after hours. Just a beat-up laminate top with 2 stools, but it had seen more wisdom traded than most church pews. I pulled out the cups Sarah kept for special occasions, tin ones with Marine Corps emblems worn half smooth from decades of use. The familiar scrape of metal on metal as I unscrewed Hank's thermos cap took me right back to those nights in Vietnam, when coffee was more precious than gold. "Still drinking it black as your old sergeant's heart, I see," I said, watching the steam curl up in the fluorescent light. The rich smell filled the small office, mixing with the ever-present scent of sawdust and machine oil. "Some things don't need improving." Hank settled onto his stool, hat now resting on the counter. Through the office window, dusk was painting the aisles in deeper shadows, turning familiar shelves into canyon walls. I laid it all out for him. The birthday ambush, the brochure's glossy promises, the bank accounts frozen like pond water in January. Hank just listened, fingers tapping that same slow rhythm he'd used to keep us calm during firefights. 3 taps, pause. 3 taps, pause. "Some habits stick with you." "Your boy's moving fast," he said finally. "Too fast to be making this up as he goes. That's what scares me." I sipped the coffee, letting its warmth fight back against the chill that had settled in my bones. "He's had time to set his pieces on the board. I'm just now learning there's a game." Hank's eyes, sharp as ever under those bushy brows, fixed on the file cabinet in the corner. "What about after Sarah passed? Remember those papers we signed?" My hand stilled mid-sip. "The estate documents? Might be worth another look." The small cabinet's lock clicked open with familiar precision. Inside, everything was exactly where Sarah had organized it. Folders labeled in her careful handwriting, each one a chapter of our life together. I pulled them out with the reverence of handling old battle flags, laying them on the counter between coffee cups. Hank leafed through them slowly, weathered fingers tracing signatures and dates. He paused at a supplemental deed, squinting at the legal language. "Hold up. This section here, about marital property, partitioned interest. What's that about?" The memory rose up clear as yesterday. Sarah and me sitting in this same office 20 years back, when the store had finally turned its first real profit. "I put half the store in her name," I said quietly. "Seemed right. She worked these aisles as hard as I did, knew every supplier by their first kid's name. The books might have had my signature, but this place was built on her smile as much as my sweat." "Smart woman, Sarah." Hank's tone shifted like a soldier spotting something through the jungle canopy, always thinking 3 steps ahead. So tell me, Walt, who inherited her half? My coffee cup froze halfway to my mouth. The lawyer's office came back to me in perfect detail, the day after we'd laid Sarah to rest. Blinds drawn against the summer glare, wilted funeral flowers dropping petals on his polished desk. His voice had been soft but precise as he walked me through the documents. She set up a trust, I said slowly, the pieces clicking into place like tumblers in a lock. Said it was insurance in case anything ever came between me and the store. Hank's fingers stopped their tapping. Insurance against exactly what's happening now. I'd bet my pension on it. He leaned forward, elbows on the counter. Those papers still around? I nodded, reaching for the bottom drawer where Sarah's most important documents slept beneath her faded photo. The drawer slid open with a whisper of old wood, and there they were, bound in blue legal paper, waiting like ammunition in a forgotten foxhole. The blue folder's edges were soft from handling, but the papers inside remained crisp and official. Sarah's final gift to me, though I hadn't known it then. My fingers trembled slightly as I lifted out the trust documents, remembering how her hand had shaken when she signed them. Even then, weak from the treatments, she'd insisted on reviewing every page. "Would you look at that?" I breathed, scanning the key paragraph. The legal language was dense, but the heart of it stood out, clear as sunrise. Upon the death of Sarah Elizabeth Carver, her 50% ownership interest shall pass to the Sarah E. Carver Family Trust, with Walter James Carver serving as sole trustee. You know that feeling? When you've been underwater too long, lungs burning, and suddenly break through to sweet air. That's what hit me as the words sank in. My son couldn't force me out of a business I still legally controlled. The store wasn't his to give away. "Hank," I said, my voice stronger than it had been in days, "read this section here." He adjusted his reading glasses and leaned in close, moving his finger line by line through the legalese. I watched his face, seeing the same revelation dawn that had just lifted the weight from my shoulders. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered. "Sarah didn't just leave you half the store. She locked it up tight where Junior can't touch it." He flipped to the signature pages, checking dates and stamps with the same attention he'd once given to mission orders. "Notarized, properly filed, witnessed by the bank manager himself. This is solid, Walt. Rock solid." I stood straighter, feeling my spine remember its proper alignment. Amazing how a few pieces of paper could restore a man's full height. The fluorescent lights seemed brighter somehow, the familiar shelves of hardware more like fortress walls than prison bars. "Look here," Hank said, tapping the corner of a court notice that had been tucked into the folder. "Your boy's got his hearing scheduled 6 weeks from tomorrow. That's your countdown, but it's also your advantage. Time to get your ducks in a row." I pulled my old desk calendar closer, the kind with plenty of writing space that Sarah always preferred to those fancy electronic ones. The hearing date glared up at me in red ink, July 15th. I drew careful circles around each Friday leading up to it, 6 markers on the road to either victory or defeat. 6 weeks, I murmured, already mentally cataloguing what needed doing. Need to pull together vendor statements, inventory reports, proof I'm still sharp as ever behind that register. "Don't forget character witnesses," Hank added. "Bet plenty of folks in town would love to tell the judge how you helped them out of jams over the years." My eyes drifted to the register, its drawer locked tight thanks to the bank's protective freeze. The sight would have panicked me an hour ago, but now it was just another obstacle to work around. I had enough cash tucked away in the safe to keep the lights on, and I knew half a dozen suppliers who'd extend credit, based on nothing but a handshake and 30 years of on-time payments. "I can make it 6 weeks," I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. "Got enough set aside to cover basic bills, and Ted down at the electrical supply house still owes me for rewiring his cabin last summer." Hank nodded approvingly. "Survival's what we do best, old friend." He gathered the trust documents carefully, squaring the edges with precise movements. "Want me to make copies of these? Keep a set somewhere safe, just in case." "Good thinking." I reached for my keys, the familiar weight of them somehow more comforting now. The copy shop on Maple's still open for another hour. The next morning, Hank showed up before sunrise with a stack of legal pads and a determination I hadn't seen since our Marine days. We mapped out a battle plan right there at the counter, coffee growing cold while we plotted. "Discipline wins wars," he reminded me. drawing neat columns on yellow paper. Mornings for running the store, proving you're still master of your domain. Afternoons, we build your case. Evenings, we organize and practice. You ever notice how having a schedule can anchor you when the world's spinning? We stuck to that routine like a lifeline. Every morning, I'd throw myself into store operations with renewed purpose. I'd check inventory with the same precision I'd used for 50 years, calculating reorder points in my head, while customers watched. Funny how many concerned neighbors suddenly noticed my sharp memory for their exact paint colors from 3 years back. "See these vendor contracts?" I'd say to Hank during our afternoon sessions, spreading papers across the back office desk. "Every one of them gives us better terms than industry standard. You don't get preferential pricing by being addled." We built affidavits like building houses, foundation first, then framework, then details. I documented every seasonal trend I'd mastered, when to stock extra pipe fittings before the first freeze, how many generators to order before hurricane season. Each decision backed by decades of data and dead-on accurate. "Now," Hank would say, playing judge, "explain how you determine optimal inventory levels." I'd straighten up and answer in plain English, "Take these wood screws. I track 5 years of sales data, adjust for construction trends, factor in bulk discounts, and maintain just enough stock to earn vendor rebates without tying up cash. Last quarter's inventory turn rate was 4.2, better than industry average. But it wasn't all defense. I had to show why my son's takeover would hurt the business. Remember when he ordered those fancy European light fixtures nobody wanted? Or how he pushed to computerize everything before learning the old system? I listed every incident where he chose flash over function, appearance over experience. "Don't get emotional," Hank would warn when my voice grew tight. "Just state the facts. Date, action, consequence." We practiced my testimony every evening until my words flowed smooth as familiar tools in practiced hands. Some answers came easy. "Yes, Your Honor, I can recite my profit margins for the past 3 quarters. Others caught in my throat. "No, Your Honor, my son never completed the advanced inventory training he claims to have mastered." You know what's funny? When you're fighting for your life's work, the days feel like minutes and the nights stretch like years. After closing, when Hank had gone home and the aisles grew shadowy, doubt would creep in like fog under a door. I'd picture those antiseptic hallways at Sunset Pines, imagine the endless bingo games and regulated meal times. Sometimes I'd find myself staring at Sarah's empty chair, wondering if I was being stubborn or stupid or both. That's when Hank's voice would echo in my head. "Hold the line, Walt. Just hold the line." We assembled everything into a 3-ring binder, organized with the same care I used for my tool chest. Tab 1, Store Performance. Tab 2, Management History. Tab 3, Professional References. And right at the front, under a tab labeled Control in Hank's precise handwriting, we placed the trust document, our ace in the hole. Tonight I'm alone in the store again, listening to the old building settle around me. The binder sits on the counter like a loaded weapon. My eyes keep drifting to the front door, half expecting my son's lawyers to burst in and try to snatch it away. But the trust is filed with the county now, copies safe in 3 different places. All I have to do is stand my ground until the hearing. Through the window I can see my reflection in the darkened glass, and for the first time in weeks I recognize the man looking back at me. I woke to the sound of rain tapping against the storefront. Windows. Nature's own countdown clock. 6 weeks had shrunk to 24 hours until the filing deadline. You know that feeling when your whole future hangs on getting everything just right? That was this morning, every second ticking louder than the last. The old brass bell chimed as Hank pushed through the door, shaking water from his jacket like a determined old watchdog. He was carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the same expression I'd seen before tough missions back in our Marine days. "Ready to make this official, Walt?" I nodded, patting the stack of binders we'd prepared. 3 copies, just like the court required. Each one told our story through numbers and facts, no emotional appeals, just pure business sense backed by half a century of proof. "Let's run through the checklist one more time," I said, spreading papers across the counter where I'd helped countless customers. Over the years, the wood was worn smooth from decades of transactions, each scratch a memory of honest dealings. Remember when I mentioned that letter from my accountant, the one where he sided with my son? We'd drafted a point-by-point rebuttal, complete with highlighted sections from my books showing every calculation was spot on. Next to it, I'd laid out a timeline of recent business decisions, like that bulk purchase of copper pipe right before prices spiked. Pure instinct born from experience, and it had saved us thousands. Your inventory reports are solid gold, Hank said, reviewing the numbers. Last quarter's figures match perfectly with your projections. That's not luck, that's expertise. I ran another inventory check just to be certain. The numbers lined up exactly with our previous counts, every bolt and bracket accounted for. It's funny how calming it can be, this kind of precision. Like finding true level on a shelf. You know it when you see it. The courthouse clock struck 10 as we carried our binders through the rain. Each step up those marble stairs felt heavier than the last, but we kept moving. Inside, the clerk's office smelled of paper and authority. The woman behind the counter knew her business, checking page counts, stamping documents, marking timestamps with mechanical efficiency. Thump, thump, thump. Each stamp echoed like artillery in that quiet room. I caught Hank's eye, and we shared a ghost of a smile. Some battles are fought with papers instead of bullets, but they're battles just the same. Back at the store, I was double-checking our copies when my phone buzzed. A text from my son. Closing arguments already won, hope you're ready to pack. My hands started that old tremor, the one that had been showing up since this whole mess began. But this time I just watched it happen, letting it run its course. The shake passed quicker than usual, maybe because I knew we'd done everything right, everything legal, everything true. He's counting chickens before they're hatched, Hank said, reading over my shoulder. Let him be cocky. Tomorrow's soon enough to show our hand. The rest of the day passed in a blur of final preparations. I locked our primary binder in the old fireproof safe, the same one that had protected the store's documents through 3 decades of business. The combination clicked into place with familiar precision. Evening found me at home, laying out my court suit, the one Sarah had helped me pick out years ago for special occasions. The shoes beside it gleamed with fresh polish, reflecting the bedside lamp like dark mirrors. I set 2 alarms, knowing sleep would be restless at best. Lying there in the dark, listening to the rain, I whispered the only prayer that felt right. Let the truth hold, because that's what this was really about, wasn't it? Not just keeping my store, but standing up for what's real and earned and true. Everything I'd built, everything Sarah and I had created together, it all came down to tomorrow. Morning broke with the kind of clarity you only get after a good storm. The courthouse steps were still dark with leftover rain, but the sky above had been scrubbed to a crisp autumn blue. You know the sort, the kind that makes you think God just gave the whole world a fresh start. I adjusted my tie in the car's side mirror, Sarah's voice echoing in my head about always checking the knot twice. Funny how some habits stick with you, isn't it? Hank pulled up right on schedule in his old Ford, wearing the same pressed shirt he'd saved for military tribunals. Looking sharp, Walt, he said, falling into step beside me. Like you're about to close a deal with the Pentagon. The courthouse lobby smelled of lemon polish and authority. My footsteps echoed off the marble floors, the same ones I'd walked across to pay property taxes for the past 50 years. But today felt different. Today those echoes carried the weight of everything I'd built. And there was my son, holding court near the water fountain like he was hosting a charity gala. He'd gone full corporate in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my monthly inventory. A cluster of relatives orbited around him, all nodding and smiling like they were already celebrating. Just look at how dedicated Junior is, I heard Cousin Martha say, taking time from his busy schedule to handle this situation. My stomach clenched, but I kept my face neutral. You learn that in the Marines, how to wear patience like armor. The bailiff called our case number, and we filed into courtroom 3. Judge Harrison sat behind her bench, radiating the kind of calm you only get from decades of separating truth from theater. Her clerk's hands moved with quiet efficiency, sorting papers into precise stacks. My son's attorney rose first, young, polished, probably billed by the syllable. He painted a picture that made my jaw ache, me as some doddering old-timer too proud to admit I was slipping. He waved the accountant's letter like a flag, quoting phrases about cognitive concerns and fiscal responsibility. Then came the bank statements, the restricted accounts, all dressed up as evidence of my supposed decline. Your Honor, he said, this is about protecting a father who's given everything to his business. Sometimes love means making hard choices for those who can't make them for themselves. I sat there, hands folded in my lap, watching the performance. Each word landed like a hammer strike on seasoned oak, solid hits meant to split me down the middle. The room started to swim a little, faces blurring into watercolors. Then I felt it. Tap, tap on the bench beside me. Hank's signal, same as we'd used in foxholes when focus meant survival. My vision snapped back, sharp as a fresh-cut key. The son's attorney finished with a flourish about preserving dignity that made me think of fancy wrapping paper around an empty box. Judge Harrison's pen moved steadily across her notepad, her expression giving away nothing. "Is the defense prepared to present?" she asked, looking directly at me. I stood, my fingers steady on the binder we'd prepared. The walk to the witness stand felt like crossing no man's land, but my steps didn't falter. The clerk swore me in, and I settled into the chair, setting our evidence on the small table beside me. You know what steadied me most? The brass letters of Carver's Hardware gleaming in my mind. 50 years of early mornings and late nights, of helping neighbors find exactly what they needed, of building something real. My son might have his fancy suit and rehearsed smile, but I had truth lined up in that binder like ammunition. I placed my hand on the worn cover, feeling the edges of every document we'd gathered. This wasn't just paper. It was proof. Proof of competence, proof of dedication, proof that some things can't be measured in quarterly reports. Judge Harrison nodded, indicating I should begin. "Whenever you're ready, Mr. Carver." Hank sat straight-backed in the gallery, steady as a lighthouse. My son's smile had slipped just a fraction, probably wondering why I looked more confident than confused. I opened the binder to our first exhibit, and the pages whispered with promise. "I'd like to start with last month's inventory rotation," I said, pulling out our first exhibit. "See, in hardware, timing is everything. You stock snow shovels before the first flake falls, not after." I walked the judge through our seasonal planning calendar, something I'd kept since '73 when a surprise April blizzard taught me about preparedness. Every transition was marked, in my careful handwriting, spring gardening to summer grilling, fall winterizing to Christmas lights. "Note the margin improvements, Your Honor," I said, pointing to the highlighted columns. Each category swap increased turn rates by 12% over last year. Judge Harrison studied the numbers, her reading glasses catching the fluorescent light. "And these ordering decisions were all yours, Mr. Carver." "Yes, ma'am. Take our Weber grills." I pulled out another sheet. "I pre-ordered in January when prices were low, sold every unit by Labor Day at full margin. You can check the timestamps on the purchase orders. Ever seen someone trying not to look worried?" My son kept his corporate smile, but his leg was bouncing under the table like a jackhammer. His attorney shuffled papers, probably searching for something to counter plain facts with fancy words. "Let's talk cash controls," I continued, moving to the next tab. "Daily reconciliation, dual counts on deposits, surprise audits every quarter. Here's last week's numbers, balanced to the penny." The judge nodded, making notes. I held up our vendor history report. "These relationships go back decades. Ace Hardware, Stanley Tools, Benjamin Moore, they don't extend platinum credit terms to businesses run by confused old men. You could have heard a washer drop in that courtroom." Then Hank took the stand, ramrod straight like he was facing inspection. "Permission to introduce additional evidence, Your Honor?" The judge gestured for him to continue. Hank pulled out the trust documents, the ones we'd spent weeks verifying. "I witnessed these being filed after Mrs. Carver's passing. Every signature, every date, every stamp is certified." The clerk marked them as exhibits while Hank explained each page. The store ownership was split 50-50 between Walt and his wife. Upon her death, her half passed into this trust, with Walt as sole trustee. I watched my son's face as understanding hit. His smile cracked like cheap paint. He leaned forward, whispering urgently to his attorney, who started flipping through his legal pad with nervous fingers. "Mr. Carver," Judge Harrison said, adjusting her glasses, "these trust documents appear to grant you complete control over 50% of the business assets. Is that your understanding?" I turned straight to the relevant section. We'd tagged it with a blue marker. "Yes, Your Honor. Page 12, paragraph 4. The trustee shall maintain full authority over all trust assets, including business interests, without limitation or interference." The judge's gavel hung in the air as she read the passage. Then she turned to my son's side of the courtroom. "Counselor, were you aware of this trust arrangement when you filed for guardianship?" His attorney stood, tugging at his collar. The expensive paper in his briefcase couldn't answer that question. My son's leg had stopped bouncing. Now he sat frozen, like someone who just realized he'd built his house on sand. I glanced at Hank, who gave me that slight nod we'd used in combat. Mission accomplished, target neutralized. But this wasn't about destroying my son. It was about protecting what my wife and I had built together, about keeping a promise made over 50 years of marriage and morning coffee and careful bookkeeping. The judge set down her pen and looked directly at my son. "I believe we need to reassess the premises of this petition." She turned back to the trust documents, and the whole courtroom seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what would come next. Judge Harrison's ruling cut through the courtroom like a table saw through pine. "Petition for guardianship is denied. The trust documentation is valid and controlling." She glanced at my son's attorney. "Furthermore, any attempted transfer of business assets without trustee approval is void." You know that moment when you're installing a new deadbolt and everything finally clicks into place? That's how it felt, hearing those words. My shoulders straightened as 50 years of work stood secured behind legal steel. My son's face went through colors like a bad paint sample, first white, then red, finally settling into a sickly gray. His attorney started packing his briefcase, but the damage was already spreading beyond leather portfolios and court stamps. Mrs. Chen from the flower shop was sitting in the back row. She supplies all our garden section roses. Her phone was already in her hand, thumbs moving fast. I could almost see the news racing down Main Street. "Did you hear about young Carver trying to push his father out?" The courtroom cleared with whispers following my son like wasps. "Shame," I heard someone say. "His own father," another voice. After all Walt's done for this town, I stood in the marble hallway, accepting handshakes and backslaps from folks who'd known me since I first hung that Carver's Hardware sign. Even the courthouse janitor, who'd been buying his paint from us for 20 years, gave me a quiet, "Good for you, Walt." Then my son appeared, his confident stride reduced to uncertain steps. He looked like he did at 12 when I caught him taking money from the register. Lost, scared, realizing too late that actions carry weight. For a moment, our eyes met. His face crumpled into something young and desperate, searching for words that wouldn't come. I just nodded. Nothing needed saying. The truth had spoken loud enough. Walking out into the noon sun felt like stepping into a new season. The light caught the brass letters on my storefront across the street, and I swear they looked brighter. Hank clapped my shoulder. "Let's get you back to work, Marine." The store keys felt right in my hand. Solid, earned, certain. Inside, the answering machine was already blinking. First message. "Mr. Carver, this is Bob from Metropolitan Electric. We're canceling that meeting about changing suppliers. We'll stick with your vendor relationships." Second message. "Walt, Jack Henderson. Look, forget what your boy said about modernizing the inventory system. Your way works fine. See you at Rotary next week." I flipped the closed sign to open and counted out the till. Same way I had for 50 years, same way I taught my son before he decided spreadsheets knew better than experience. The register drawer slid home with that familiar zing click that always reminded me of certainty. The phone rang. I answered with my usual, "Carver's Hardware, how can I help?" "Walt, it's Pete from the Contractors Association." He cleared his throat. "Listen, about that bulk account your son was setting up, and we're staying with you, the old way. Man's got to stand by people who stood by him, right?" "Appreciate that, Pete. Words, getting around fast," he added. "Nobody likes seeing family try to muscle out family. Especially not someone who served this town honest as you have." After I hung up, I stood at the counter where my wife used to do the books. The afternoon light slanted through the windows, catching dust motes and memory. The door chime tinkled, my first customer since the hearing. Mrs. Rodriguez needed window caulk. As I helped her find the right type, she squeezed my arm. "We all heard what happened in court," she said. "My husband says he's pulling his construction orders from your son's new venture. Some things matter more than fancy promises, no?" The phone kept ringing. By closing time, 5 more accounts had called to cancel dealings with my son's planned takeover. Each call felt like another nail securing my store's foundation. Not because I wanted revenge. God knows that kind of thing eats at you worse than rust. But because trust once broken is harder to repair than any tool I've ever fixed. I pulled into the parking lot when the sky was still more promise than light. The air had that special crispness you only get before dawn, sharp with pine sap from the lumber delivery I'd scheduled for later. Felt right starting fresh like this. You know that moment when you're alone with something you've built and everything just feels settled. That was me standing there with my keys watching the night fade. 50 years of opening this store and this morning carried its own kind of weight. The brass letters on the storefront, Carver's Hardware, had collected a bit of dust during all the legal mess. I'd brought my old polishing cloth, the soft flannel one Martha used to iron. Started with the C, working slow and careful, the way my dad taught me back when I was just a stock boy dreaming of my own place. A man's name is his bond, he'd said. Keep it bright. The sun was just starting to peek over Anderson's drugstore across the street when I finished. Those letters gleamed like new money, but honest money, the kind you earn one customer at a time. The whole sign caught fire in the morning light, throwing our family name onto the sidewalk in golden letters. Inside, everything waited exactly where it should be. I walked the aisles, touching familiar shelves, checking stock levels I knew by heart. The old floorboards creaked their morning song under my feet. Near the paint counter, I caught a whiff of coffee. Hank had slipped in the back door with 2 cups. "Figured you'd be here early," he said, handing me one. "Big day." I nodded, sipping the coffee. Stores still standing. More than standing. He gestured toward the window where I could see Tom Miller and his son waiting. They do all the framing work over in the new subdivision. Been customers since Tom was his boy's age. 7 o'clock sharp, I unlocked the doors. Tom stepped in, shaking his head with a grin. "Heard Junior's supply company lost 3 more contracts yesterday," he said. "After that courtroom business hit the papers, nobody's touching him. Reputation's worth more than fancy promises, right, Walt? Just here to serve customers." Tom? Same as always, but he was right. Word travels fast in small towns, and my son's attempted takeover had burned bridges faster than morning fog burning off the river. By 9, I'd heard about 2 more suppliers backing out of his venture. By 10, the Contractors Association had voted to suspend his membership pending review. Didn't make me happy exactly. Can't feel joy watching your own flesh and blood reap what they've sown. But there's a certain rightness when truth finally breaks through, like watching a level bubble center itself after a long wobble. Around noon, I opened the old storage closet and took out Martha's photo, the same one that used to sit by the register when she worked the books. Her smile hadn't changed, direct, honest, like she could see right through any nonsense you might try. The glass needed a quick polish, but then it caught the light just right. I set it on the counter where it belonged, center stage, like she always was in our life together. The sun through the front windows hit the frame, sending little rainbow arrows dancing across the counter's worn wood. The register dinged. Mrs. Hopkins buying her weekly box of screws for her grandson's scout projects. She saw the photo and touched Martha's frame gently. "She'd be proud, Walt, standing your ground like this. This store, it's not just inventory and accounts, it's..." She paused, searching for the right words. "It's respect," I finished quietly. "Earned over years, not grabbed in a day." After she left, I stood there with my hand on Martha's frame, feeling the smooth wood beneath my fingers. The same fingers that had built shelves with her, counted stock, raised a son we thought understood value beyond dollar signs. The register drawer closed with that solid click that always reminded me of certainty. Somewhere across town, my son was probably watching his plans crumble like old mortar. The court papers had stripped his legal claim, but it was the town's judgment that would sting longer. You can recover from losing money, but losing trust, that's a debt that compounds daily. I straightened Martha's photo one last time, her smile steady as sunrise. "Respect is earned," I whispered to her glass-covered smile, "not stolen."